This is a film where our kids are the experts of their own experience. Every single one of them to a letter said, my mental illness. They owned it. They told us things that many of them said they hadn't even told their families.
We were astonished to learn that every single one of them was not just willing, but eager to share with us their most private moments, their most intimate struggles. They were open books.
If the former head of the NIMH, psychiatrist, neuroscientist, misses it in his own daughter, then mental illness is truly hiding in plain sight, period.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dear Family, the podcast. This is episode number 99. I'm so excited to bring you Chris and Erik Ewers, brothers and documentarians. We know how important it is to connect to other people's stories, to get in on the inside and understand any topic. And we know that our youth are in a major mental health crisis. There aren't enough beds in hospitals. So many of our kids are struggling right now with mental health issues that were only further exacerbated by the pandemic. And I'm so excited to bring you these brothers, and it's called Dear Family, and how great to have brothers, but also how great to have seasoned, incredible documentarians who are able to pull out a story like no other, and not just one story, but more than 20 young people's stories. And I'm really honored to have a chance to talk to them. And I know once you listen to this podcast, you are going to definitely want to check out their documentary, Hiding in Plain Sight. Thank you for listening to the Dear Family podcast. It really means a lot. Thank you so much for following me on all the social media platforms at Right Now Rachel. That's right with a W. And I just want to wish you all the best. And remember, mental illness can be an invisible illness and it can hide in plain sight. So check in on your loved ones, ask for help, know there's community, and that there is hope. Sending you lots of love. Erik and Chris Ewers are brothers and co-directors on a new Ken Burns PBS documentary, Hiding in Plain Sight. The two-part 4-hour film is about the mental health crisis that our youth are facing, and it follows the journeys of more than 20 young Americans from all over the country and all walks of life. The first-person accounts show the seemingly insurmountable obstacles faced by those who live with mental disorders. Erik Ewers, an Emmy Award-winning editor, has worked with documentary filmmaker Ken Burns for more than 30 years, including nearly all of his single and multi-episodic films. He currently serves as Ken's senior editor and as co-director and editor of Ewers Brothers Productions, a preferred collaborative company in the co-creation of Ken's films. Erik is an expert in all aspects of filmmaking, having served as music producer, writer, director, film producer, picture editor, and sound effects, music, and dialogue editor. And he's open about his own mental health struggles. Christopher Lauren Ewers, also known as Chris, and Erik's younger brother, has been working behind the camera for over 20 years and has traveled the world exploring the human experience through the lens. His eclectic work includes a variety of subjects, formats, and collaborators. However, it's the unique mix of Chris's film and journalism background that puts documentary filmmaking at the center of his work. His cinematography has been featured in each of Ken's films since the Vietnam War. The Ewers brothers' timely documentary, Hiding in Plain Sight, confronts the issues of stigma, discrimination, awareness, and silence, helping to push the ongoing shift in the public perception of mental illness today. You will understand why Erik and Chris refer to the youth they interviewed as heroes, and you will leave feeling hopeful with insight as to how to change the narrative to find wellness and community. Welcome, Chris and Erik. I'm so happy to have you on the Dear Family podcast. I follow the organization Wellbeings, a nonprofit that works to destigmatize mental health and addressing the critical health needs of Americans through original digital content. And when they shared the trailer for Hiding in Plain Sight, I knew that this documentary was going to be really important and impactful. And I don't think it could be more timely. All the headlines in the news, 60 Minutes, New York Times, we know that this is a true public mental health emergency that our kids are facing. I was so honored to have a chance to preview the documentary, and I watched it in one go. And I was really moved and really touched. Bravo, you guys did such an amazing job. And it literally brought tears to my eyes just hearing these kids speak from their heart. So important. That impact with other kids, peer-to-peer, seeing other kids that are struggling is huge. But I want you to know I left feeling hopeful. And that's so fantastic. We're going to talk all about your documentary. But before we do that, I want the listeners to be able to distinguish between who Chris is and who Erik is. And because this is a podcast called Dear Family, I always love to start by having you tell us a little bit about your family. And obviously you guys are brothers, which is awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your family.
Age before beauty.
I think I'm a lot prettier than you, though.
I agree with you. It's just the saying.
I love the banter.
And I don't really mean that. Well, I have a loving wife and 2 daughters. Both are now officially over the age of 21, which is quite a milestone for both of them. My younger daughter is still in college. My older daughter has graduated. She's an animation major, I should say was, and she actually did the animation in the film. Talk about hitting the ground running. We're extraordinarily proud of her and her immediate contribution within her own discipline. I live in Keene, New Hampshire. It's very quiet. There's not a lot to do up here. My hobbies are editing. My career is directing and editing. And when I have spare time, I like to edit.
I am Chris Ewers. I live in Connecticut, just outside of New York City, with my wife and our 2 children. Our daughter, Billy, is 9, and our son, Finn, is 6. They are unbelievably loud. They're great kids. It's so wonderful to see them really hitting their strides as kids. Certainly my daughter coming into her own as, I hate to call her a young adult, but I mean, she acts like it sometimes. I am a co-director on the film, also the cinematographer, and I'm thrilled to be here to talk about.
And where did you guys grow up? And are there any other siblings?
We grew up outside of Boston in Massachusetts, in a little town called Holliston, about 25 miles southwest of the city. We have an older sister, Kim, who lives in South Carolina, and our parents are scattered all over. One also in South Carolina, and then another in Connecticut.
So you guys are East Coasters.
Yes, definitely.
Tell us about Ewers Brothers Productions and what it's like working with your brother.
I don't know if Chris loves this story or not, but I fondly remember I started working for Ken Burns right out of college, literally the day after graduation. Talk about lucky, getting thrown into an opportunity. But sometime in my 20s, Chris being anywhere from 11 to 13, he and I got along really, really well, especially with our parents divorcing. We were extraordinarily close. And one day, just blurted out to me, he said, someday we're going to have a company. It's going to be called Ewers Brothers. It's going to be great. I don't know what we're going to do, but it's going to be great. And I never forgot that. And the short story is Chris, not speaking for him, but he went off to do his own thing, ended up on the West Coast while I continued my pursuits with Ken. And when he finally moved back to the East Coast, he engaged with me almost immediately about starting a production company. I was nervous to talk to Ken about it because I was afraid that Ken would see it as a conflict of interest. Ken gave me a hug and said, how can I help? And don't quit your day job. So for 10 years or more, I continued to edit by day for Ken Burns and cultivate Ewers Brothers along with my brother.
That's so cool that you get to work together. I love that. We know mental illness most often appears in childhood and teenage years, with 75% of the onset before the age of 25. and 50% before the age of 14. And trauma often is the trigger. And we also know that half of those kids will never receive any treatment. But the good news is the earlier we catch them, the better. And them getting better is not just possible, it's probable, which is why your documentary is so important. And Hiding in Plain Sight interviews more than 20 young people. Where did you find these incredible young people? Tell us their age range. And how did you get them to open up, especially with teens? We know that often the last thing they want to do is stand out.
I'm so happy that you added that last sentence because, of course, that was our preconceived notion as well. It's super interesting because this speaks to such a large theme in the film, and that is a misunderstanding. Regardless of our age, our generation, we all have our own thoughts and feelings and understandings or misunderstandings about our health, particularly our mental health and the mental health of those around us. We were brought up in this environment of stigma and in isolation, and it was the thing that we don't talk about. Before we started the project, we projected that onto this age demographic, the youth, young adult demographic, thinking they really don't share typically about their lives, their day-to-day goings-ons, their feelings, their emotions. And so we approached it from that point of view, and we were completely amazed, blown over to learn, in fact, that it was the exact opposite. Once we were able to identify these kids, and I'll let Erik speak to that, and build a relationship with them, we were astonished to learn that every single one of them was not just willing, but eager to share with us their most private moments, their most intimate struggles. They were open books, every single one. It was quite an education and an epiphany for us that, wow, what don't we know? And one of our experts in the film, Key Dunning, the wonderful concept that she employs is instead of asking what's wrong with somebody or what their problem is, we should instead be asking, what don't we know about these people? It was quite honestly a shock for us to come to the understanding that getting them to talk was not going to be the major hurdle.
I think first finding the young people who are willing to talk is also an important distinction, because the number one thing we really learned is it is hiding in plain sight. Some of them were hesitant in the sense that they were still going through something. They were not quite at that point that many of them were at, which was an acceptance and realization of what, and we say the words mental illness. I just want to be clear. I know sometimes that's not a popular phrase. To me, it's no more stigmatizing than any other phrase. This is a film where our kids are the experts of their own experience. Every single one of them to a letter said, my mental illness. They owned it, whatever you want to call it, mental health challenge, mental health condition. Many of them had gotten to the point where they owned it and they recognized it. What Chris was referring to is what we kind of crudely called the gift, that through that adversity and struggle, they find a mission to help others, whether it's a friend, a schoolmate, whether it's a complete stranger. They all had this unbelievable desire to speak out, and it moved us to tears many, many times. The age bracket is from age 11 to 27, with a small number, I think about 4 or 5 adults thrown in. And we did that because we wanted some people who also had the time to reflect, not be a teen, not be a young person or a preteen, but actually reflect back to the time when they were enduring mental health challenges and give them the opportunity to impart that extra wisdom that being a parent and being an adult in the working world, in the real world, if you will, brings.
Finding these subjects, or we affectionately call them heroes for the film, turned out to be a very much a sort of grassroots effort. We had certain advocates of the film who are larger players in the mental health world, Patrick Kennedy being a very special one. And through him, we were introduced to smaller community organizations, thought leaders, et cetera. It was very organic. One introduction would lead to another. Many times, the person we thought we were being introduced to would be for a very specific storyline. And then upon meeting with and talking with and forming a relationship with these people, we realized a lot of the times that, oh, well, in fact, it's not at all the story that we wanted you to tell, but in fact, your story is so much more compelling and interesting and relevant because it is yours and not something that we were trying to impose to fit the needs of the film. It was very much an organic evolution of all of the people that we met over the 3 years that we were in production on this. Only 2 of them were not included in the film. And that was only because their stories we now understand would be better suited for the second film that we were about to start making about mental health challenges for the adult demographic. And otherwise, we could not have been, it was serendipitous. Everything about this project has been serendipitous from the timing when the idea was introduced to us to our broadcast date next month. This happens frequently for us. We come into a project not really understanding just how timely, relevant, important the discussion will be when we finally finish it.
Gen Z, or the younger ones, Gen Alpha, they are very open. Maybe it's because the social media, cell phone age of no privacy and bringing down those walls. But that's an interesting conundrum because why do they have such an increased rate in anxiety and suicide? I'd like to hear why the documentary is called Hiding in Plain Sight.
Chris actually came up with the name very, very early on. And it was exciting because it was a premise that we were seeking to prove true or false. And for every one person that we spoke to, countless others would not want to do this. There are reasons why people don't seek help for years and years and years. In our film, in the introduction, Patrick Kennedy says that most people just endure it because they say, well, it's not that bad. Well, compared to who? That's the question. It's yours. It's something that you have to deal with. I will speak for myself. I have my own mental health challenges. I've been on medication for over 25 years, and I understand that. And I think stigma plays a big role in keeping kids from talking. Even in our film, Lucas says, I did not want to believe I had an anxiety problem. And he said, in fact, even the thought of taking medication, even in private, was too tough for him because he said, I don't want to be that kid. So it's still very, very real. You talked about social media. It's all about appearances. As Lydia says in the film, she says, I hate it, but I'm a part of it. And Alexis says in the film, it's literally competition. I'm going to be the best me, and my me is going to be better than your me. And everything's going to look rosy and perfect. So the younger generation, especially those who are more accustomed to having social media be a part of their life growing up from their toddler years, their earliest years they can remember, are trying to be someone they're not. So they're almost in that potential for openness and discussing their challenges. There's a flip side of it, which is you can't do that because it's going to reflect it in some imperfect way. Kenneth Cole at the Mental Health Coalition, he was interested in the project and he spoke with us and he said, people say it's 1 in 4. He said, I believe it's 4 in 4 as far as being affected by this topic. And he said, it's sometimes 5 in 4. It's that bad. And that's the heart of the matter.
That's why I started this podcast. I come from a family that has 4 suicides and you name it, my family has it. But truly, I could walk up to anyone in a supermarket and everyone is affected by mental health and I could interview them. Everyone has a family story. Mental health issues are invisible illnesses. And it's often the people that have the biggest smiles that are suffering the most. How important it is for our youth to see these kids be brave and come forward. I really hope that educators get a hold of this and share it in their classrooms. This was a 3-year project. Did you film during the pandemic?
We were incredibly fortunate to have completed so many of our on-camera interviews prior to lockdown, prior to the beginning of 2020. That's not to say at the time we didn't have any idea. We had very large plans. We had a huge list of additional subjects to interview. And of course, when COVID hit and when we all went into lockdown, at first it was a panic moment, as it was for everybody. And then once we sort of settled into it, we realized that we needed to continue to work and to make use of the downtime. And actually what we discovered, it was a blessing in disguise to a certain extent. It allowed us to really focus on the script, to focus on the stories that we had collected, not knowing if we were going to be able to collect anymore. It actually gave us the ability to really see the forest through the trees. Once things calmed down a bit and we all collectively became more educated and started to travel a little bit more cautiously, we had the opportunity to really identify only a handful of additional needs and to go out and be very targeted about how we collect them and how we're going to these additional characters and how we're interacting with them to film their interviews. It was a whole new world for us, just as it was for everybody else.
And we know that the isolation with our teens definitely has added a lot of mental stress because we're social creatures, and especially youth, they need their friends. They don't often turn to parents, they turn to their friends. And we know that social media and their lack of sleep, whether it's studying for APs or video games or scrolling through social media, and a lot of them aren't exercising like they should be because we didn't have Netflix at the drop of a hat. I'm curious if there was anything else that really surprised you besides what I just mentioned that was impacting their mental health.
Believe it or not, it seems logical, but the concept of PTSD still, at least for my generation, you immediately go towards the combat veteran, the rape victim, the extremes. But trauma, compared to who? Trauma can come in very small packages, and it can be systemic in one's life. And as McKaylin said in the film, she said, my dad was an addict. And when he was high, it was ugly. But she thought it was normal because that was her life and her experience. Even my own experiences in my life, there was something systemic that caused me to become what I have become later in life, perhaps throughout my entire life, but I didn't realize it until my 20s. I didn't really realize it until we made the film, honestly. The film has educated us in a way we can never put into words. And I honestly, sincerely hope that if it has the power to do that for us, it has the power to do that for everyone. When we went into these interviews with these kids and young people, we knew a little about their story. They would give us a quick pre-interview on the phone overview of their life, their experiences. We would just sit quiet and take notes to help prepare for questions. But what we found is when we got there and we met them and we hung out with them and we told them and assured them that this film is not meant to dramatize or sensationalize. It's meant to be honest and full of integrity and hopeful, and that we would never put them in harm's way. And once we built up that trust and that communication between each other, all of a sudden, as the one who does the interviews, they told us things that many of them said they hadn't even told their families. I can't tell you how many times I would sit back in my own time and think about how loving and generous and honest these kids were with, in theory, total strangers. You want to talk about a responsibility to do the right thing. This is their life story. We have to take care of it, and we have to show the beauty in the sadness and ugliness, which all human beings experience. No one's exempt. Mental illness is on a sliding scale. In my opinion, from what I've learned, everyone has it, in quotes. Whether you need help or not is individual. Whether you need someone to lend a hand to get you up out of that trench that you're stuck in is really, you just need more help than others. Some people need more help walking or sleeping or whatever it is. And so I think one of the biggest surprises for me was trauma, however small, and I'm doing quotes for people who can't see this, however small or considerable it is. And that is a huge surprise.
What a privilege for them to open up to you like that. That is a gift. We have to catch these kids when they're young. I live in Los Angeles where we have a major homeless situation. Young kids, whether they're in the foster care system or abused at home or whatever the trauma that triggers it, untreated mental illness can lead to homelessness. It can lead to incarceration. But then there can be that one person, that conversation that you had literally could changed their life, the fact that they felt comfortable and opened up with you. And so that's really impactful. Thank you for sharing that.
We really tried to make sure that they understood, even to this day, giving each kid the option. I keep saying kids, they're young adults. Even the 11-year-old is probably more mature than I am, honestly.
Wow, is that kid mature? Amazing.
He's way beyond his years. And we give them every opportunity to participate or not participate in the promotion of the film. And we tell them, this is the essence. They have become our role models, Chris and I and our team. We look up to them for the struggles that they've been through and the lessons they've learned. Some of them think, wow, I'm an addict, or I have schizophrenia, or I explode in anger. They're role models. And Chris and I started calling them heroes, and they are.
I also appreciate that you said, I have schizophrenia, not I am schizophrenic, because as we know, you wouldn't say I am heart disease, right?
Right.
Thank you for that. In 2015, you both collaborated with Ken Burns to create a 2-hour PBS film, The Mayo Clinic, Faith, Hope, Science. And you served as producer, director, and editor. We're going to go back to Hiding in Plain Sight, but do you want to let the listeners know a little bit about that documentary?
It's really fascinating. As filmmakers, we're storytellers. And when the idea for a film about the Mayo Clinic came to us, Erik and I both were mostly unfamiliar with it and had to Google it. In hindsight, at the time, making a film about a healthcare institution, which is what initially we thought, wasn't as exciting. It wouldn't have been our first choice, when in fact, as it is with every film project, particularly documentary film project, it's an education. It's a process of discovery. It's an evolution. And of course, within days, weeks, of research and conversation, we realized it's not a film about a healthcare institution. It's a film about humanity. It's a film about what is possible when people come together to care for one another. Aside from bottom lines and best practices and everything else, it is a film less about healthcare and more about care for one another, the model that they established there. It was really interesting to us to come out of that film and then into this film about mental health. It wasn't something that we pitched to PBS. It was the opposite. And of course, at the time, as it always is, we didn't realize just how important and how, again, relevant the story is. All of these stories from our approach are about the human experience, whether that's built and creating a hospital or trying to move the needle in public discourse about a major health crisis of our time. They're almost one and the same from our point of view.
One really incredible thing that came out of that project, obviously an appreciation of what the word care means in healthcare on a level I've never experienced on the East Coast. Yeah. My wife and I both have been there and gone through the system since. And it was no different, no better or worse than the everyday person. There's no such thing as special treatment. You get the same treatment. There's not enough time in your podcast to tell you how amazing that place is. But for us as filmmakers, honestly, it changed our Ewers Brothers mentality on how we want to make historical films. You look at Ken's typical films, and I've worked with Ken for 32 years. My running joke is I've been with Ken ever since the Civil War. Working on all of Ken's films since the Civil War series, he brings history to life. That's the magic of Ken. That's something he's known for. He lets the viewer apply it to the present. In the Mayo Clinic film, we learned, I think, what is going to be our way of doing a historical film, which is different from Ken's, is history applied to the present directly. Mayo's history goes back into the 19th century. It's pretty remarkable and actually incredibly fascinating history, starting with a nun who said she had a vision from God saying that she needs to build a hospital in the wilderness. Back then, it was frontier land, and it would one day be world-renowned for its medical arts. And the Mayo brothers and their father thought she was crazy. They said, we're not going to do that. And she said, well, if I raise the money and build the hospital, will you practice in it? And that's how it started. And we were allowed to take that history and the model of care they developed into the mid-20th century. And we were able to apply it and show how it still thrives and works today at the Mayo Clinic through following patients. I love the model. We hope to do a film on Henry David Thoreau, the man who is probably the world's first environmentalist, who said in the 1840s, what is the use of a house if you don't have a tolerable planet to put it on? Is exactly what's happening today. He was also the man who wrote Civil Disobedience, to speak up against your government or any leadership authority if you don't believe they're doing the right thing. It's so relevant today. And I think if we are fortunate enough to make that film, we want to take his words and apply it to everything that we as Americans and the world is experiencing today. That's what the Mayo Clinic film did for us as filmmakers.
And it's all related. We know that mental health is very tied into our physical health. When we're physically not feeling well, mentally we're off. When we're mentally not feeling well, our physical health is off. It would be interesting to see if that model you speak of in the Mayo Clinic could work with the mental health care system. And your next project down the road about the environment in Thoreau, we know that that's causing anxiety, especially among our teens. They're very concerned, as they should be. So thank you for telling us about that. Chris, you use your journalism background in your documentary filmmaking. And Erik, you have been Ken's senior editor for decades, which is incredible. How do you balance working for him and working together?
Ken is the best boss I've ever had. He encourages creative passion. He loves a good creative argument. I've actually been angry at times because I'm that passionate. And I thought he would be mad at me afterwards. And he patted me on the back and says, "You care so much. Thank you." In every respect, the man is a genius. He is so intelligent. He is so articulate. Working for him has been an incredible privilege. And everyone that works with him has this spirit of collaboration. And I think that's the biggest thing that Ken has taught me over the years is it takes a village to make a film. He would solicit critiques in any given screening over the process of making a film. He would solicit critique from the interns. It was important to him. It was not gratuitous. Chris and I both have embodied that with our film. It's not a film that Chris and I made. It's a film that Chris and I and many, many others who put in their blood, sweat, and tears to make it happen. The transition from working with Ken in my day job to now is still ongoing in the sense that right now I don't have a project during the day. I worked on Hemingway, which finished a little over a third of the way into the mental health film. So I was doing two films at once. Once Hemingway was off the plate, there was this period where I was solely on this project, which was necessary. Looking back, I'm very grateful that I was able to put 100% of my time. I'd always put 100% of my ability into it, but 100% of my time. And I'm sure I'll be asked back to edit something with Ken, and I will never say no. And he is also still helping us to continue our brand in partnership with him.
Do you want to add anything, Chris?
I think the short answer is that we don't sleep very much.
In Hiding in Plain Sight, you had Dr. Thomas Insel on as an expert, and he's a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist, and he's the former director of the National Institute of Mental Health. And I just finished reading his book, Healing: Our Path from Mental Illness to Mental Health. And I just had the great opportunity to meet him. I was really touched, both in his book, but also he shares in the documentary that he missed the fact that his daughter was dying from anorexia. Here is someone that is this expert and misses his own child's suffering, hiding in plain sight. Why was it important to have an expert, in addition to the young adults and teens and kids, be so vulnerable and share a story like that?
Everybody needs to be vulnerable. We go back to the statistic, it's 1 in 4 now. It's 4 in 4, every single one of us, whether we like to admit it or not. Not to digress from your question, but if 1 in 4 individuals in this country had heart disease, it would be the only topic of discussion. We would be talking about it constantly. We would be pouring money into NGOs and government organizations and research to try to address what we would certainly be deeming as the greatest public health crisis of our time. That is the case with mental health across the board. It was incredibly important for us that, given the topic, that each and every subject of the film was vulnerable and was able to share. We're never going to be able to normalize the experience of mental health unless we're able to talk about it and acknowledge it. Similar to what happened with HIV and cancer, we need the tipping point for mental health awareness and acknowledgement. It's just that simple. Dr. Insel understands better than anybody. He was an incredible interview. He was incredibly open, honest, courageous, and vulnerable in his conversations with us. There are so many outtakes, not just from his interview, but from everybody's interviews that we were unable to fit into the film for a time constraint, if nothing else, but that we hope will have the effect of breaking down that barrier that the viewing audience and the public in general has learned to put up when it comes to our mental health. Patrick Kennedy gave it the greatest analogy. If we're walking down the street and we come across somebody who is in the throes of a psychotic episode, we cross the street or we turn and walk the other way. If we're walking down the same street and we come across somebody who's been hit by a car, who's fallen over and is bleeding, we'll stop and call 911 and offer help. And it's the clearest case of double standard of discrimination when it comes to mental health challenges. It was incredibly important for us that Dr. Insel and Dr. Vinson and Key Dunning, all of our experts were as open and honest and vulnerable as each one of our heroes were.
It's very simple. Tom shows us that no one is exempt. And if the former head of the NIMH, psychiatrist, neuroscientist, misses it in his own daughter, then mental illness is truly hiding in plain sight, period.
Absolutely. The parents that are watching this documentary with their kids makes them feel a little less guilty or that shame and that stigma for not catching something, because it could be hiding. Your kid could be in the other room and you have no idea that this is happening under your roof. And we know that substance abuse disorders often begin when people self-medicate their symptoms. What trends did you notice when it came to youth using substances and becoming addicted?
Many of our young people resorted to self-medication and self-harm in a way to alleviate the pain that they were feeling inside. Key Dunning, our child therapist in the film, she put it best. She said, well, why wouldn't you want to find a release or relief from that pain? Of course, it's human nature to do that. It's just because they don't have some other coping method to replace it with. So there's where the help is really needed, where if they're offered something through therapy or through medication, through someone who has knowledge on the subject, then they're able to use that instead, hopefully before that self-medication turns into becoming a habit, which can, in fact, turn into becoming an addiction. A lot of our young people were on that sliding scale from casual use to hooked. Don't care. This is my escape. And it's only human to want to have relief. It's frowned on in society. Don't do that. We don't want to encourage people to do it, but it is understandable that if they don't have something to replace it with, that they'll resort to what's closest to them.
I don't remember the young woman's name. Lydia? Yeah. On the outside, she looks picture perfect. I volunteer and I go into high schools and middle schools and I do a program for NAMI called Ending the Silence. I talk about how it's often people that you don't know that are suffering. And she's that example of hiding in plain sight, where if you had just seen her or you just looked at her social media, she doesn't seem like she would be suffering the way she is.
One of the many takeaways that we hope the various aspects of the audience get from the film is exactly that. There doesn't need to be an overt cry for help. Mental health exists on a spectrum and it's different for everybody. It's like our fingerprints. Two people can both have depression and both experience it in entirely different ways. It's not like the flu. It obviously complicates matters when it comes to treatment, medication. We tried to create relatability. We tried to cast as wide a spectrum with the heroes in our film and with the subject matters, the topics, the symptoms. Our hope is that at least one person, one character, one hero can be relatable to almost any of the viewing public. It's our hope that when someone's watching the film that they can say, oh, well, I don't relate to these experiences, but this is me, or this is my son or daughter. This is my coworker. This is my best friend. In doing so, we're really hoping to shift those misconceptions.
That's important for people to see themselves in someone else. In Hiding in Plain Sight, you highlight how Black and Brown and Indigenous people do not get to be mentally ill. Why is the issue of race and mental health entangled?
That question should fall on the shoulders of the people in the film. And McKellen says it best. She says, I think there are too many other issues going on in America with African Americans. It's not possible to discuss this right now. It's just too much. There is a double stigma, as Yadia and McKellen in the film detail so eloquently. They articulate it so well. And Alexis, too, when she talked about Indigenous people who, in her experiences, it's just too much. I think it's that simple.
Race is intricately married with every conversation that we have in America. It has been for centuries, since the beginning of recorded time, basically. We can't separate our physical issues and race. We can't separate our mental health challenges and race. We can't even separate the mental health system from the criminal justice system in this country currently. And of course, race is a massive issue within the criminal justice system. It's inescapable in every conversation. And of course, it was incredibly important to us that it was represented in the film and represented by as diverse a group as we could possibly find.
And that's why I'm hoping that this documentary does reach educators, because brown or Black or Indigenous child is likely going to be treated differently than a white child who's acting out. It's important to notice those biases and understand where it's coming from and the trauma. We can never be really too educated.
It's also very much cultural as well. We have a character in the film who is of Thai descent, talking about her feelings when she was growing up as a child. It wasn't frowned upon, but it just wasn't something that happened within the Thai culture. And of course, that affected her greatly as she grew, as she matured, and as she continued to struggle in silence. The double standard, the double stigma is a very crucial component to the larger discussion of mental health care challenges.
I do believe our youth will lead the way. I interviewed a young Latina girl who told me that her parents just said, go to church and pray. And she had to educate her parents about helping her brother who had schizophrenia. We only have a few minutes, so I'm going to cut to the last two questions. And I'm going to start with Chris, and I'll ask you the same question, Erik. If you could write your younger 20-year-old self a Dear Chris love letter, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
I think the most important thing that I could possibly tell my younger self is that it's going to be okay. Our early life experiences are incredibly tumultuous. I don't care who you are, where you're from, schooling, adolescence, early adult experiences and development, being out on your own. We're learning how to be humans. We're learning how to be people. As much as we like to think, there's no precedent, there's no guidebook really for that. It is, again, unique to each one of us. I think about this constantly with my own children, the world that they're inheriting. I think about larger topics that are completely out of their control, and I worry about it. But I would like to think that 20 years from now, the letter that my older self would write to me currently would be the same, that it is all going to be okay. We will figure it out. And the one thing that is incredibly important in order for that to happen is honesty and integrity. If we're able to interact with one another as human beings and as equals, and if we're able to admit when we're wrong and ask for forgiveness, and when we're right, not gloat, we need to have a foundational empathy for one another. If we can hold on to that, I think that all of our other issues can be solved.
Thank you for that.
That's a real tough one. What I thought was normal growing up was not. If I could go back and write something to myself that could warn me for what could happen in the future as a result of those things that weren't normal, I would tell that little lonely boy that would spend most of his time by himself, who thought everything was his fault, everything. So I would tell him that it wasn't, but I would warn him to stand up for himself and to not succumb to the beliefs that I was not worth anything, that my voice wasn't important. When you spend a lifetime hearing that, when you finally come to terms with the confusion and the end result of what that caused, in my 50s, I have to start over and unpack it and figure it out. So I wish I could have told myself that this was not normal. I wish I could have been my own therapist and give myself advice on how to negotiate the troubled waters back then. But of course, that can't happen. So we do it now.
How amazing that in hiding in plain sight, you're both allowing people to be vulnerable and empathetic and share their stories and have a voice. So that's really beautiful and empowering. Last question. Do you have any happiness habits? Anything that really brings you joy?
Things that bring me joy are, I brought up with my beautiful wife in this home. There's nothing else that brings me joy like my children and my wife. And no, there's nothing else. Family is everything. You only hope that your kids someday will say that as well.
Thoreau says it best. He implores us all to find our own Waldens. He found a mental space where he could reflect on his life and the life of humanity at large. And all of the distraction for me, that place is, I need to feel like I'm contributing positively in some way. And same as Erik, through the raising of my family, my wife and our 2 kids, through our work together, we're not reinventing the wheel, but we're hopefully contributing to the public good. We're doing something that moves us all collectively forward, or at very least gets us to talk about how we can all collectively move forward, whether it's about mental health or healthcare or music or environmentalism, conservatism, whatever it happens to be able to wake up every day and feel like I'm moving forward and helping everyone else to move forward is really important.
Rachel, can I speak to the parents who are listening to your podcast?
Please, absolutely.
I just want to say to parents that this is a difficult topic. And I know as a parent, we want to shield our children from the difficult things in life, not because we're promoting a film, but because we have seen what this film can do. I know it's a tough topic, but I sincerely hope that you will take the time to sit down with your son or daughter and experience the film together, because you become a part of the conversation. The way we filmed it, the way they speak, they're speaking to you. They're telling you the truth about young people today. It's a hard topic, but like you said yourself, Rachel, it's also hopeful. And I just want to end by saying that we shared it to a friend of mine, Kara, who has daughters, one of which was 12 years old. And Kara said she decided to let her 12-year-old watch the 2 episodes with her, not quite knowing what to expect. And she said afterwards, what followed was an hour-plus long conversation her 12-year-old had with her mother about things that Kara knew nothing about troubles in school, about bullying, about self-image, about sex, about drugs, about feelings. She said, I sat there and thought, who is this child who is sharing all of this with me? The film created a space for her 12-year-old to talk openly about her thoughts and feelings and her experiences in the world today. And from that moment, when Kara told me with tears, I realized that a film sometimes can become something bigger than itself. It's bigger than the makers of it. It's bigger than the people in it. It becomes something that could actually save lives, that could actually help. And I know it sounds like self-promotion, but I sincerely believe with all my heart that this film can form a bridge with your own child and help countless people. So I sincerely hope that you'll take the opportunity to see it through from episode 1 through episode 2. Thank you.
I will definitely be watching it again with my teenage daughter for sure. Absolutely. And it's such a great starting point to open those conversations when you don't know how, and it allows all of these different youth to lead the way. Bravo, you guys. Congratulations. Tell us when it's airing and where we can find it.
Hiding in Plain Sight, Youth Mental Illness will be airing June 27th and 28th nationally on PBS and streaming simultaneously on pbs.org and other platforms.
I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you for doing such an important service. And it was so lovely meeting you.
And thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's equally important.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. Take care.
Alrighty,
enjoy your families.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.